Well, here we are back again for another week of movie discussion. This time, episode 44. With you, as always, me, Chucky, and we've got Jiggity Jigsaw.
Indeed, you do.
So, please tell the audience what they're in store for today.
Well, as always, we like giving you guys variety. So, of course, three of these movies are from the same 4-year period. We have Uninvited from 1987 about, well, you guys may know the movie. It's a somewhat ridiculous killer cat type movie. Then we have The Changeling from 1980, a classic ghost movie. Lisa from 1989, a movie that came out in 1989. Then the Alpha classic Psycho from 1960, Alfred Hitchcock, probably one of the most famous 60s horror movies. And we finish off with The Forced Power from 1990, starring a beautifully handsome Lou Diamond Phillips.
Alrighty, we'll get started with Uninvited from 1987, which is essentially about a cat who is infected with a genetically engineered virus. He escapes from this lab and goes on a killing spree on a boat which is owned by a shady businessman, and there's also a young group of people who were also invited to hang out with on the boat. Or at least the women were invited, the guys tacked along. Anyways, this is a fucking ridiculous movie. But somewhat enjoyable. I mean, in a way, not completely, but I mean, some of these cat attacks are just, it's a sight worth seeing, I guess. But yeah, overall, this is a pretty stupid fucking movie. I've seen this once before. I bought it on Blu-ray just so I could, watch it in much better quality. And I had some fun with it the first time. Like, there's a scene towards the beginning where a cat just smashes through the back of a truck like a maniac, and I don't know, I just found it hilarious at the time. All the scenes with the cat are kind of interesting because you're waiting to see this little mutant thing come out of its mouth, or, turn into this mutant. It's hard to tell because the transformation scenes in it are pretty much always the same. Like, you just see the thing coming out of its mouth, but you don't really see, outside of it maybe biting someone, we never see that full transformation, at least not to memory. But it's a movie where the people in it don't really matter all that much, don't really care about the characters. The girls are pretty, but there's not a whole lot more to it.
Yeah, so this has been a movie that I've known about for some time. I always found it vaguely interesting, just the idea of people trapped on a yacht trying to survive a killer cat type thing. I like the idea of people in a confined location. I mean, if you're in the middle of the ocean, you can't just run away, you have to deal with it. So I like the idea. This movie isn't necessarily the best example of that done right. It's entertaining. I would certainly give it that much. I did have fun with this, especially toward the end, once they get on the lifeboat and the cat attacks them twice. It's like the exact same shot. And it's just beautiful. And of course the final scene too makes me wish there was a second Uninvited movie. I know.
Yeah, that ridiculous freeze frame ending, yeah.
I have such high hopes. I'll also say that I did enjoy seeing a few of these faces. Probably, at least in my mind, most famous would be George Kennedy, who isn't necessarily a big name, but he was in Just Before Dawn and a few other horror movies from the late 70s, early 80s. So I did appreciate seeing him here.
He's also been in some big movies too, I think.
Yeah, see, I agree. I just don't know them. And
like Naked Gun or something, yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know who the guy who played the businessman, a guy named Alex Cole, but I did like his sort of campy, sort of slimy charm attitude. It was sort of fun to watch. I felt sort of bad for the guy that he brought those two girls on, but neither one was interested in giving him anything. But hey, he tried.
Yeah, he took a shot at it. Yeah.
And then he was going to take another shot at it, i.e. rape. So that's always fun.
Yeah, that chick had a pretty good figure, by the way.
To be honest, and this is probably something I say for a lot of these types of movies, all the women to me pretty much look the same.
Yeah, you're a love 'em and leave 'em type. You're like, whatever. I just use them and throw them away.
I enjoy the two girls at the beginning. I think it's like Bobby and I forget what the other one's name was. But I did enjoy the captain of the ship. I thought that was a sort of not necessarily interesting, but at least a slightly deeper character. And then who doesn't like the biologist guy, who's like one of the only people on the ship who's actually worth, anything. Because he's actually trying to do something. So that's sort of nice.
Pretty big coincidence that you're dealing with this mutant cat and you just happen to have a biologist on board.
Yeah, plus that guy does not really seem to be the type to be friends with the two other guys. But, friends are as friends do.
Yeah. I was actually feeling sorry for him kind of halfway through the movie because when they're on the boat, the other two girls are all over those two guys and he's just always there right next to them or in the corner or whatever. And even at one point when they're dancing, he's just dancing by himself. But luckily he did get that the other lady, the captain, he kind of started pairing up with her a bit.
And that was quite the cute romance. Until the cat ruins stuff by breaking the mood.
Speaking of the cat, I couldn't help but notice, I'm sure other people had to pick up on this too, is just, well, two things. How often the cat is making cat noises, which is just ridiculously overdone. A cat doesn't meow and, make all those noises that constantly. Not normally. And I know it's not necessarily a normal cat, but still. And also with that being said, you can clearly see, especially on some really close-up shots, there was definitely one shot where they had nothing but the cat's face in the camera. You can hear it going meow, but its mouth is not opening at all. And you can tell a lot of these noises are just the exact same soundbite repeated. Like, there's no variation in those meows and whatever other noises it's making. It's like the same one looped over and over in each different scene.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is this has to be remade with more realistic cat sounds.
Yeah. Well, look, it's kind of humorous for the fact that it does make these noises when it's clearly not making the noises. And, like, there's some kind of funny thing about it, but still. And I guess, that's forgivable for this type of movie because it's so ridiculous, but it's just one of those things you can't help but pick up on.
Yeah, I think it's also fair to say that this movie has somewhat of a reputation for being one of those, I guess some people would say it's a quote-unquote so bad it's good type movie. It's definitely the type of movie that you could imagine Mystery Science Theater doing because it's just so... I don't know, it's not like it's a necessarily terrible movie, because I've certainly seen worse movies than this from the same time period, but it just definitely isn't the highest quality that you could come to expect. Although it did predate Jason Takes Manhattan, so well done there.
So Jason ripped this movie off. The Friday the 13th guys, they watched this movie and they're like, fucking hell, why didn't we think of that?
And then they made Jason Takes a Longboat Ride, one of the best movies in the franchise.
Yeah, so let's get to rating this puppy or kitty.
That's some quality humor right there.
Yeah. So, look, I feel like Uninvited is one of those movies where you take the cat out of it, you got a pretty stupid, boring movie. And with the cat, you still got a pretty stupid, but entertaining movie. It's definitely not a good movie in any sense, but it was ridiculous enough to be enjoyed on some level, so I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, so I did not necessarily love the movie, but like you said, I did have a decent time with it. I thought there was enough enjoyable scenes and characters that made it watchable. So I gave this a 5.5. I'm going to round it up to a 6 out of 10. It's not great, but it's certainly a fun movie to watch, and I could probably see myself watching this in the future without having too much difficulty.
I may not recall correctly, but it might have been during that attempted rape scene. You could hear like the cat just going off in the background, like, and I'm pretty sure the cat wasn't actually shown in the scene, or at least not for a little while later. It just again with the cat noises, just seemed really odd that it was just looping these sounds even when the cat's not really showing up on the screen during that moment.
Yeah, it also makes me wonder why some of these bigger names like Clue Gallagher or Kennedy even got involved in this. I mean, they had to see that script and think, God, this is not going to work, guys.
I think money talks and bullshit gets shown on the screen.
As much money as this got them, though. But speaking of money, actually, well, I don't even know what movie I'm segueing into. Speaking of money, let's talk about the money you could find in Seattle. And Seattle is where our next movie happens to take place, which is The Changeling from 1980.
Do you really find money in Seattle, or is this just another classic segue?
It's a combination they have. I'm sure somebody has money in Seattle. It's a pretty expensive cost of living out there. So, Changeling from 1980. It's a Canadian movie in which this middle-aged guy is pretty old for like a main character. His wife and kid dies, and he relocates from New York City to Seattle, gets this big Victorian house, and then strange happenings start to happen. And he, along with a friend of his in Seattle, attempt to figure out the mystery of this ghost, why it's haunting the house, and what is going on. It's a very well-known and well-respected ghost movie, mainly because I think it's a very good ghost movie, especially when you take into consideration that, I guess, big focus on the mystery. When a ghost movie has a really good mystery going with it, that can really, in my opinion, heighten how much you're engrossed with it. And this movie, I thought, had a fantastic mystery. Plus, it had really moving characters. I mean, George C. Scott as the main character was fantastic. The opening scene, I mean, that's a pretty harrowing opening scene. I'm not even a parent, and it's a good opening scene. But you also have Marvin Douglas, who plays this senator, who also I think gives a fantastic performance.
Yeah, this is a movie I've been wanting to see for a while, and I just blind bought it and gave it a watch. Well, gave it 2 watches, technically, because the first time I watched it, I kind of fell asleep. That's not really a major knock on the movie, I was just really tired. But anyways, yeah, I went into this, I'm pretty sure I'd seen the trailer for it recently, and I was like, ooh, that looks really good, I gotta watch this. And I've seen George C. Scott and other things, most notably Exorcist 3, which is a pretty good movie. This one just, I really wanted to enjoy it, but I just felt like the pace was just a little too slow for me, and the scares didn't quite do it for me. Like, I watched this almost twice now, and I can't even really think of much to say about it, other than that it just moved too slow, and that's not really a knock on the movie, it's just my personal tastes, I guess, just don't quite translate to how this movie played out. And that is my review.
Yeah, I will say this movie, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as to call it a slow burn, because I think there's enough mildly interesting things happening throughout the movie. I do like the bit of a conspiracy to stop these people from figuring out what happened in the house. And like I said, it's the whole mystery section that interests me the most. There's a scene, or I guess a sequence, in which George C. Scott and the woman, trying to find the woman's name, Trish Van de Veer, in which they're trying to figure out this mystery, and they like go through microfilm in the library. They go to this random house where this old wall was, like back in the 1900s. I'm okay. And it just has, I know the sequence right there. I really like them just going through the mystery, trying to figure out exactly what was going on, and the solution to the mystery itself, I thought, was somewhat unique. I can't think off the top of my head of a movie that went this route, but I certainly did like it, and especially toward the end when George C. Scott has a sort of like face-off with the senator. I think it's Carmichael, played by Marvin Douglas. I think it's a fantastic scene, especially because Douglas, I think, gives such a great performance there. And I don't know, it just, to me, the movie, it might take a while to get going, and it's not like a plethora of scary things happening. I mean, I guess some people might say the whole seance scene was frightening. I didn't really see it, but it was still a decent scene. And I did like him listening back to the audio tapes, hearing the ghost's voice in the background. So there's certainly some things in here that, I enjoyed. Even like the wheelchair, when it popped up, was pretty quality. Who doesn't like seeing the wheelchair chase that one woman down? That'd be like, 6 years before Friday used that wheelchair to chase down the guy in Dream Warriors, so.
Nothing like a good wheelchair scene.
Indeed. So, I don't know, I feel like this movie had something going for it. It might be the atmosphere, it might be a combination of the acting, that just made it work for me. I can certainly understand, because this movie's like almost 2 hours long, I can understand some people not finding there being enough in it to keep their interest going throughout. But I think toward the end it gets pretty solid. I don't know, to me I think it worked out fine.
Yeah. Well, I just can't help but think about how, at the beginning, how necessary it was to keep pushing that car. Like, I don't think he needed to force his wife and daughter to push it as far as they did, so imagine having to push a car all that way, and your reward is a spicy collision.
Yeah, at the same time though, I've got nothing. I have to say, I did like that phone booth that was seemingly in the middle of nowhere.
I like how he got into it fine and suddenly can't even get out of it.
Well, I think he was probably just in pre-shock. He just saw what's going on, and
my ability to push has been taken away from me.
Yes. So, I will say I think it's a pretty quality opening though. And it does give you a bit more reason to, feel for the character. I mean, there's actually a scene in the movie that, I think I forget if he's like waking up or going to sleep, but he's just in bed sobbing. And it's like, God, talk about an emotional scene. And then he keeps finding that one ball that his daughter played with. It just keeps popping up in the house, which I thought the first time it happened, it sort of bounces slowly down the stairs. It's, subtly creepy. But, like I said, I can imagine that it may not be enough for the more modern day connoisseur.
Yeah, maybe for its time, like that scene was unexpected, but as soon as he came back and there was like another noise or something, I knew exactly what was going to happen. That ball was going to come rolling back down those stairs. So
yeah, I guess when the movie, because from my understanding, this is probably one of the top 5 most popular Ghost movies, if you discount Patrick Swayze's Ghost. If you have a movie that's popular, it's definitely going to create some things that happen down the line. I will say, comparing this movie to other big haunted house type movies around the same period, like The Legend of Hell House from '73, I'll say that this movie, I think, is decent amount better. I didn't necessarily enjoy this as much as, let's say, Burned Offerings, which came out '76, because that one had like an atmosphere that just can't be beat. But I don't know, this movie I saw has a pretty good thing going forward, and I think for that reason I'm probably going to give this movie an 8 out of 10.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Look, I'll definitely check this out again at some point years down the line, but for now, I don't know if it's the timing or if it's just... I don't know if there's a universe in which I'm going to ever love this movie, but we'll see. I just couldn't get into it fully because it moved quite slow. And that's not to say I don't ever enjoy slow-moving movies. There are some that I do. It's just the combination of its pace and the type of scares it had, and it's just everything in it. It just didn't get there for me.
Now the question then becomes, did you prefer this or Uninvited?
Probably Uninvited, which might be sad to say, but I mean it's hard to beat a mutant cat coming after you. But, yeah.
It's only your life, it's not mine.
Well, I also have 2 kitties here, so you know the movie speaks to me.
Somebody once threw a cat at me, so that's my experience with cats.
Awesome.
Speaking of awesome, what do we have up next?
You're right. Awesome is right. Next we have Lisa from 1989, which is about a young teenager who begins phone stalking this, I guess, good-looking older guy. Well, older than her. He's not all that old. But unbeknownst to her, the man happens to be a serial killer. And good times is had by all. So I had never seen this movie before, but in fact, I think the first time I had even seen a trailer or anything about the movie was actually just a couple of months ago. And I just blindly bought it on Blu-ray because it looked good. In fact, the lead girl in it, Stacey Keenan, she's one of the characters on 90s sitcom Step by Step, which I used to watch all the time. So I was like, yeah, let's just watch this. And as you know, I'm I was going to say pretty big fan, but I'd rather say I tend to enjoy watching 90s and 80s thriller movies. That's not to say that a lot of them are good, but I just enjoy watching them. And this one, you know, it's got its ups and downs, but I think overall it's a pretty decent thriller. Not great, but decent. As soon as I see the United Artists logo at the start, I was like, oh yeah, this is, you know, I'm feeling this because that's what pops up at the beginning of Child's Play. So that definitely helped.
So every single United Artists movie, immediate 10/10.
Yeah, well, it starts off at a 10 out of 10. I think it's a movie where eventually you're starting to clamor on for something to happen because there's a lot of phone calls back and forth, and I think the phone conversations are pretty good. Like, I can imagine just being that guy getting those calls, and you're like, who is this?
Hey guy, remember me?
Hey guy, I'll blow you in the back alley. That's where I wish well, maybe not that call because she's 14, but
was the actress actually 14?
Well, here's the funny thing about that. As soon as it got brought up in the movie that she was 14, I'm like, there's no fucking way she's anywhere close to 14. And I should have known this based on my time watching Step by Step because the age would have made sense. But the actress actually is 14.
Huh, that's impressive.
Which is fucking incredible because she, I was like, she looks closer to 18. I mean, goddamn. But anyways, because when I watch her on Step by Step, she was playing kind of 17, 18-year-old type character, and that was early 90s. So, and at that time, she did look the age. So I should have made that connection in my mind, but I didn't.
Yeah, so I didn't know much about this movie before starting it. And it turned out to be a pretty decent movie. It's not necessarily the type of movie I would go out of my way to watch, but it had a lot of pretty good performances, some pretty tense scenes. That sequence in which she's like in the backseat of the car, trying not to be noticed. I mean, that's a pretty good scene right there.
Yeah, well, in that scene, like, I just imagine being the guy and having someone whose crushes you. Imagine like if you were in the car driving and you're letting go big ripper farts and you're picking your nose, anything like that. That would have been amusing.
What I find interesting, we never really learned that much about this guy.
Yeah.
He always has a pretty serious demeanor. I'm going to assume he's some type of sociopath, but I thought he was a pretty interesting character for what little we knew about him. I did like his whole candlelight thing. I do also the audacity of buying a bunch of candles in the gas station. Like, I mean, be a little more let's be a bit more careful, guy. But I think one of the things I enjoyed most about seeing this just came out 89, but like that type of childhood is like something I know it seems so foreign to me. Like, obviously when I was a kid, around the age of like, God, it would be like 11, 12, people started quote unquote dating. So seeing like, this 14-year-old girl really wanting to date, but she got to do it until she's 16, like, one, that's a bit old school, and two, I have to say this, from a guy who's never been a parent, I definitely do not think the mother went about it the right way. Like, the way that she was going about it was 100% going to make her do something like this. So,
yeah.
Well done, mother. It's your fault the serial killer came after you.
Yeah. And I guess in some ways, like, it took me a little while to really think about it, but I could draw a lot of parallels to a movie like American Psycho, because, there's the whole restaurant aspect in this. The killer tends to often be wearing suits or, good clothes, and he likes to kill women, and that tends to be the same thing that Patrick Bateman goes for in American Psycho, so I definitely felt a bit of an American Psycho type aura to this, and obviously this movie is way before that, so and even before the book that it's based on, I believe, so there you go.
Yeah, I also want to give a bit of props to both, obviously the main actress, Stacy Keenan, but also the mother. I thought the relationship they had, as tumultuous as it sometimes was, arguing back and forth, it seemed like a pretty real relationship in those circumstances. And I did appreciate that scene where Lisa is with her like Fran's family out like in the cabin area. She sort of just like breaks down at dinner, talking about how the mother's the only one she really has in her family. That's a pretty strong scene right there. So the movie isn't necessarily without some more of the emotional aspects, which I think helps it. I'm not like entirely a fan of the ending. I mean, it was okay. I sort of wish they went a different direction, but I don't know. It's still a pretty enjoyable movie, and definitely a bit more enjoyable than I was anticipating.
Yeah, just when you were mentioning Stacy Keenan before, I'll just add that it might be one of the best performances from a 14-year-old that I've ever seen, and I can't recall other 14-year-old performances, but I just know that like her acting in this movie is just as good as any of the adults, really. And for a 14-year-old to do that, I mean, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, I don't know what. I'll be honest, I don't know who this is. I've never seen Step by Step or anything that she's been in, to my knowledge. But I'm not sure what her history in acting is. But this is a pretty strong performance, and I'm somewhat surprised this movie isn't a bit more well known, because it seems, at least to me, it seems to have like the elements that could make it a quote unquote more of a classic. I mean, it's not like it's an unknown movie, but just the fact that I've almost never heard of it and I've not seen it brought up all that often, it seems to be a bit on the forgotten side.
Trivia time here, because I've got quite a few things that are worth noting about the movie. So this movie is co-written and directed by Gary Sherman, whose directing credits include Dead and Buried, which I know is a movie you love, and Poltergeist 3.
Eclectic tastes.
Yeah. Now, the funny thing about Poltergeist 3, the little girl in those Poltergeist movies, she died, I believe, while they were filming that movie. and they either felt like they couldn't finish the movie because of her death for one reason or another, whether it's they didn't have enough footage to go with, or they just felt it wasn't right to continue it. But the studio really pushed them to, you know, do whatever you got to do to finish the movie as best as they could. And that might explain why some people have issues with the movie. But, you know, the studio essentially promised him that if you finish that movie, we'll make any other movie that you want to make after this. You know, you just give us a script and we'll do it. And this was the movie. And the reason why he wrote this movie was supposedly because his daughter, so the director's daughter, was saying to her dad, hey, I can never watch any of your movies because they're R-rated, because she was, I don't know, maybe 11 at the time. And he wrote this movie because I think this is a PG-13 movie. And originally the censors wanted to give it an R, but when he questioned their decision to give it an R, he's like, so what do we remove from the movie to make it PG? And they actually couldn't say. They just said it was the theme of the movie. And he said, well, you can only give it a rating based on content, not on theme.
See, I'm PAA for you.
Yeah. And they eventually backed down, and I believe they gave it the PG rating. And speaking of that, I mean, there is some decent, well, there's a little bit of violence at the end. Like, there's some decent slasher-type sequences towards the end. But in any case, I think it got the PG. And he mentioned that the movie it was promised to play at heaps of theaters, and it only ended up playing at a small amount of theaters for like 1 week only. And apparently this movie did really well at the cinema, the few cinemas that it was at. Apparently it was killing it at the cinema, but they didn't continue showing it at the theaters because they already had, like, the studio had some video deal, which would have been affected if they had kept running it at the theaters. So they took it out of the theaters after a week and eventually put it on video, which is where they made a brunt of their money because of whatever deal they had in place. So that's a big bit of trivia as to why this movie exists, or why it was written, and all of that. But one other thing, and this might be something to do with the United Artists connection that I mentioned earlier. The little boy in this movie, who I believe is like the brother of Stacy Keenan's friend's character, you know, the other family. The little boy, his name is Eden Gross, or Gross, I don't know how to pronounce it, but imagine being gross. That little boy is the voice of the unpossessed good guy dolls from the original 3 Chucky movies.
Huh. It's a nice random piece of trivia.
Yeah, so he does the, hi, my name is Larry, you know, that voice. Yeah, so just another thing worth mentioning. It's just interesting, the type of trivia you come across in a movie like this.
No, out of interest, did you instantly recognize that boy for being the voice?
No, but
That's somewhat disappointing.
I noticed the name. I noticed the name in the credits at the beginning. I was like, oh, I know that name. Yeah. So there you go. But yeah, as I was saying earlier, the ending to this movie really turns the dial up from 6 to 10, I thought. And there's some violence in the movie. I remember listening to Gary Sherman talk about the movie, and he was saying something like the most violent thing in the movie is hitting the killer with a baseball bat, which I don't think is true, because I recall quite an unexpected knife stab through that guy's shoulder, and then they proceeded to kick him in the balls, which was pretty cool too. And I thought there was a fair amount of violence in that ending, and I really enjoyed that ending.
I do wish it's, at least when I watched the ending, it wasn't made clear to me if he ever actually realized that it was the daughter who was calling him and not the mother. I'm assuming he realized it, putting clues together, but he never actually says, like, hey, it was you all along, or something corny like that. No, I didn't want him to say necessarily something like that, but some type of indication he actually figured out what was going on, I think I would have appreciated it a little.
I have to assume he does, because at one point she's saying, "No, my name is Lisa," and he's like, "No, no, it's not." And later on, you can hear them calling out those names in the apartment at the end. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he was. He may have just at that point in time just been reacting to what's going on, not really thinking. But I mean, there was pretty good conflict though at the end. I did appreciate that. I just wish we had a bit more. I guess, like you said earlier, a bit more stuff going on before. I mean, the phone calls were fine and all, but it give us out that much in the way of, I guess you could say, suspense before that. Aside from the car scene, which I think is probably one of the highlights of the movie.
I guess the only other point that I had down here, and I'm kind of rehashing something we've talked about in other movies, particularly thriller movies, because you've said before that
Oh boy.
you've always felt like thriller movies are just weak horror movies, or something along those lines.
Yeah, they're just movies that wish they could be horror movies.
They're not strong enough to be a horror movie.
Like I find most thrillers to be pretty tame, to be honest. At least the thrillers I've seen. I'm not saying they can't be good movies, but yeah, they're just obviously not my cup of tea.
And I thought a little bit more about it, and I was thinking, it's not so much that they're weak horror movies. I feel like, I was going to say, I feel like they're more realistic horror movies, but even then the word realistic, probably not quite the best word, but I'd say more, I'm trying to think of the right word. I keep thinking of the word believable, but that's still not quite what I'm going for. But like, I feel like the events of a thriller movie are more likely to happen than the events of a horror movie. Like, how often are you going to have like a deranged masked killer trying to hunt people down with an axe, as opposed to like a movie like this, you just call this guy and he just happens to be a bit nuts, and he comes and attacks you.
There was a and you may have seen this. I'm not sure. I think it was a television movie, but it's a movie with Shawnee Smith from '88 called "I Saw What You Did," which has a somewhat. These two girls are playing a game, just calling up random people saying, "Hey, I saw what you did," and they happen to call a serial killer. So it's not too far removed from this type of plot. Now, like, being a TV movie, it's a lower production, but that one is often considered a horror movie. And what's interesting to me, well, actually, there's two interesting things to me. One, this movie is, at least on IMDb, one of the genres is horror, which is fine. If somebody sees this as a horror movie, I'm not going to complain. I mean, the whole genre is subjective anyway. But if you brought up a masked killer chasing people, I was thinking when I was watching this, like, if that guy had a mask, I would definitely count this as horror. But since he didn't, I'm like, I just can't do it. I know it seems like such a silly distinction, but I know some movies, and I'm assuming it's the same for every horror fan. Some movies feel like horror, and some don't, and some are like borderline. And this is obviously probably more of a borderline movie, but I just found it amusing that if they had just made that one small change, I probably could have seen this more in the genre.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also makes me think of like a movie like Fatal Attraction. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's definitely one of the best thrillers out there that you could probably watch. And like this, it's got a fairly slasher-esque type ending. Like, there's no masks or anything involved, but also that movie is 100% like, I could see that happening to someone, where you have an affair with this woman, she she doesn't go away quietly, and she comes back and starts creating hell, and eventually gets very violent. And that's, I think, the distinction between thrillers and horrors to me. Not so much that thrillers are weaker, but I can just see those situations happening in the real world more than what happens in a typical horror movie. Obviously, horror movies that involve monsters and just out there type of gore and that type of thing, those we know those are far removed from reality, but even if you took those out of the equation, I think that distinction still holds up.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of more. I mean, like a movie like, I don't know if you remember. I don't even know if we talked about it. Mikey from '92 with the Killer Kid. I mean, it's like that movie's outside the realm of possibility, but that one definitely had I guess you could say, more clear-cut horror vibe as opposed to, like, if you compare it to like maybe The Godson, which was I think an early '90s movie, which definitely came across as more of a like thriller type movie.
Yeah.
But that's the joys of the genre. It's subjective and everything's a horror movie.
So, yeah, I definitely enjoyed Lisa overall. I do feel at times I don't know if it was just that it was moving at a fairly slow pace, or that I just wanted, something to happen to, get things moving a little quicker. But eventually, by the time we got towards the end, I think it all came together pretty well. I'm going to give this one... I'll give it a 7 out of 10. Doesn't quite get there to an 8 for me, but I had a pretty good time with this, and I'm sure I'll be watching it again in a few years from now.
Yeah, so I was mildly impressed with the movie, even though it's not necessarily what I was hoping to see in the context of my life. It was a pretty decent movie. I thought the emotional scenes were all pretty strong. You can understand the mother's point of view, trying to keep her daughter away from those types of things, when she's younger. But at the same time, the way that she was doing it is like probably the worst way to do it. So, I mean, but that's parenting for you. You don't always know what you're doing is the right thing. So I thought it was a very interesting movie. I had a good time with it. It wasn't always the quickest paced movie, but I'm also going to give this one a 7 out of 10.
For reals. You enjoyed it more than Dead and Buried.
Oh God, I think I gave that one like a 9. So let's not go overboard here.
Okay.
Speaking of going overboard,
that was beautiful.
Indeed, sometimes psychopaths throw people overboard on ships. So Psycho is our next movie, from 1960. I'm guessing if you haven't seen the original, you may have at some point seen the remake, in which a secretary steals some money. It's like a spoil the moment type thing. Steals some money from an employer's client, takes a chance, wants to sort of make a life of her own, and then she sort of runs off. Eventually gets to like a seedy motel. It's not necessarily seedy, it's just in a unpopulated area, but run by a guy named Norman Bates, and things begin to happen. Now, obviously, this is one of those movies in which I can't imagine there's a large population of people who don't know, I guess, probably two of the basic things about the movie, such as the fate of Janet Leigh's character, and also the conclusion to the movie. But if you haven't seen this movie before and you already know the things, it's still an interesting movie to watch, just to see how they do it. Because I think after the famous shower scene, the movie feels a bit sluggish. Might not be the right word, but it feels a bit procedural, and it's not quite A+ material. But overall, I think it's obviously a pretty decent movie, and it's definitely a very well done suspenseful movie. I'm pretty curious. What have you seen this one before? Often, I don't really know what your history with this one is.
Yeah, I've seen this one quite a few times actually, and quite a long time ago when I first saw it. And as you know, I'm not a huge fan of movies from before the 70s, so I typically have a tough time watching anything this old. But Psycho is one of those movies that sort of a rare exception, and I think for a number of different reasons, because other movies around this time I think a couple of things. One is the music. Now, obviously, Psycho has a really iconic theme music, but I also feel like it's just like an extra level above any other movie around that time, which always seemed to play very similar. Like, I could watch 10 different movies from the 50s or early 60s, and the music would just always sound exactly the same to me. But I don't know, Psycho, it stands out in that regard. But I also think, even though the movie doesn't contain a lot of violence, the couple of scenes of violence in the movie is like something more than I've seen in other movies from its time. Especially for us, like, you could say this is one of the first slasher movies ever made, so, you know, it's got that advantage as well over other movies from its time. Now, just out of curiosity, I believe it might have been after the last show we did, or I mentioned to you that there was like a new uncut version of this that had come out, which in fact, it's the uncut version is the version that was played in theaters in the 60s, and apparently little bits and pieces were removed for when it was actually, you know, played on TV and all the home video releases and all of that. Did you happen to watch the uncut version?
I unfortunately did not.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you right now, that is the version to watch.
I do wonder if the changes are significant, because I honestly don't know much about what was either added or taken out.
To me, it was enough to change my rating by 1 point. At least based on what I remember from my previous viewings of the movie. Now, there's not a whole lot different, but it's just like little additions, and three specific additions that I can recall. One is the peephole scene, which goes a little bit longer. I believe you get to see Janet Leigh pretty much remove her entire bra for that scene. Whereas the other version, you see her start to take it off, but she doesn't quite take it off. Like, you still don't see titties or anything, so I'm not saying that, but she does completely take it off in this version. The other two parts that I recognize, which I think were the best inclusions, one is there's a scene where Norman's got like blood on his hands and he's looking at it. That's extended, and you see a lot more of that. And I don't know, for some reason that helped make that scene a lot better. Just seeing a little more, you know, blood being shown, it just kind of made a difference to me. Also helped realize the extremity of, you know, what Norman had just done when he, spoiler alert, kills her in the shower. And the other part that I can recall was the private investigator who gets, you know, he goes up the stairs and gets attacked by Norman, or Norman's mother, however you want to look at it. And he's falling down the stairs. Now, I can't recall what you see after that in the version that everyone else has been watching, but in this one, there's a lot more, you know, a lot more stabbings. You see the knife going up and down a lot more times, and for a movie like this, that meant a whole lot more to me, because, like I said, the violence and, you know, there's not a whole lot of it in the grand scheme of things when you compare it to movies from 80s, 90s, whatever. So those inclusions definitely helped make the movie feel more violent. Yeah, especially for its time period.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you know approximately how much time it quote-unquote adds on to it?
I think a little over 1 minute.
Beautiful.
Yeah, or roughly around that. But, like, outside of the uncut stuff, I will say that the movie, I felt, like, because it's been a while since I last saw this, and I did think that some of the earlier scenes in the movie were quite suspenseful as well. Like the scene where the boss sees her driving around in the car.
Yeah,
like,
that's
oh,
I
shit.
think it's a fantastic scene that Dab would take, like, and the music starting up. It's a fantastic scene.
And also the cop that is kind of stalking her after he pulls her over and, follows her to the car dealership and is just watching from across the road. That was really good too.
I always liked her initial conversation. I mean, am I acting like I'm doing anything wrong? Well, to be honest, yeah, you are. Like she was the worst liar I've ever seen. Like, that was just awkward to watch.
Yeah, yeah, I would have felt the same way. Now, there are some things about the movie that I don't particularly like, which I've never been a huge fan of, like internal monologue type stuff. There's quite a few scenes, she's driving in the car, you can hear her thoughts and what people are supposedly saying about the situation. Then you got Norman who's doing the same thing, and I don't know, there's a part of me that feels like it's explaining things or giving us information that we don't need to necessarily have.
Well, what I like about, at least with Marion Crane's dialogue, internal dialogue, she's worried about, that one guy, for instance, being like super angry with her. And I'm not saying the guy wasn't angry, but we later find out that as long as the guy gets a money back, he's not even going to, like, at least according to what that private detective said, he wasn't even going to really go after her legally, which he probably couldn't have since that wasn't apparently declared income. But I don't know, I do think it sort of increases the paranoia that she personally feels, which even gives it more reason to keep going forward with the somewhat ill-advised action she took.
Yeah. And when she took off with the 40,000, I immediately had to get on Google and search the inflation rates, because I was like, how much money is 40k worth back in the early 60s? And I had a look, and it's roughly about $350,000 US, which, okay, yeah, it's a pretty big amount. I'm not quite sure if it's big enough to go off to a private island and live the rest of your life, but yeah, it's a significant amount, I guess.
Yeah, if I had $325,000, I would be happy.
That might help me get through about, 5 or 6 years.
Hey, I might be able to go to the doctor and, actually be able to pay, so that might be fun.
Yeah.
American healthcare system, guys, let's do it.
That's pretty atrocious, actually, the American healthcare system, because I was watching a video recently, like I was just watching on YouTube this basketball video of this guy who hit his head on something, and the first thought of someone was to call 911, and he's like, no, just drinking some orange juice in the ambulance costs you $1,000, but that's so sad. I mean, in Australia, if you feel like you need to call an ambulance, you can call one and really not be charged for it. So
yeah, so I can imagine that $350,000 would probably go a longer way for you folks than it might for the average American, at least in the current system.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's pretty sad that you have to be like, well, don't ever get sick, don't ever get hurt. You can't afford it.
Yeah, so it's a fun time. I also wanted to point out that some people don't necessarily like the conclusion to this movie. Some people say it might over-explain some things. I'll be honest, I think it's a perfectly okay conclusion. I mean, I'm suspecting most of the people, watching nowadays, they already knew the plot twist anyway, so they didn't necessarily need the information. But I do sort of like how it ends in like a clinical note, like, hey, this is exactly what's going on and why it's going on. So I don't know, it never bothered me, but I do know that ending isn't necessarily to everyone's tastes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it bothered me, but I did pick up on that. Like, maybe it was just, sometimes we blast movies for just kind of having someone tell you everything that's happening in the movie, or, all the details, and that kind of happens towards the end of this, where, he did it because of this, and is he a transvestite? No, they do kind of tie everything up in a neat little bow in this one conversation. which like I said, it didn't bother me, but at the same time, I did pick up on how that could be seen as like being over-explained. Like I said, the inner monologue type stuff, like with Norman at the end, where he's got his mum's voice talking, and that doesn't do a whole lot for me. Like, I still find the more frightening scenes in the movie to be just, the actual murder scenes, and yeah, the psychological aspect of it doesn't really do all that much for me. But overall, I still enjoyed the movie.
Yeah, what I enjoy, at least toward the second half of the movie, is like the investigation. They see the old woman sitting in a chair and they want to, a private investigator wants to talk to her and everybody wants to talk to her. I mean, they concoct the whole plan at the end. Hey, you distract Norman, I'll go up and talk to the woman. And I think it sets up, because like I said, even if you know what's coming, I think it sets up a pretty quality suspense. And of course that final scene in which it's revealed that somebody is somebody. I think it's a scene when she turns that chair around and then gets attacked. I think that's a fantastic scene. And again, the very ending with Norman just in the I'm assuming that's some type of police room, interview room, but just asking for the blanket, and that in the monologue right there, I actually think is pretty good. Would they even hurt the fly? And that smile, it's just fantastic.
One bit of trivia here that I might get blasted for, but to be honest, I'd never heard of it before, and I only realized it when I IMDb'd the actress, Janet Leigh. I had no idea that she is Jamie Lee Curtis's mum.
Yeah, I know it's interesting.
It's one of those things that you think everyone probably know. Like, it's one of those pieces of trivia, because Psycho's this major classic movie. Jamie Lee Curtis is in Halloween, big horror movie classic again. I had never heard anyone actually say it.
Yeah, I think part of it might be, and this is... So just before I say this, I want to clarify that I know a decent amount about horror movies from the pre-60s, but I don't know much about other movies. But I don't know if Janet Leigh is... like, I don't know any other movie she's been in. It's not a name I know, aside from Psycho. Apparently she was a big actress, but I don't know her. And aside from I'm guessing if you ask like people, 80 out of 90 are going to say Psycho's the only movie they know her from. And that might be partially why, when it comes to Jamie Lee Curtis, not everybody makes that connection.
Well, I did notice that both of them, both Janet Leigh and Jamie Lee Curtis, are both in The Fog, but that's a movie that I haven't really watched a whole lot of, so I don't really recall.
I'll be honest, I actually I forgot Janet Leigh was in The Fog. And I think The Fog's a fantastic movie, so I feel ashamed right now.
I'm gonna have to remove your license to watch horror. Yeah.
I pretty much lost it with the fact that there's so many movies I hate that other people enjoy. So
your horror fan card has been removed.
I just
No, I didn't even know.
Well, Psycho's a good movie. It's a quality suspenseful movie. Of course, it's directed by Hitchcock. I honestly haven't seen a whole lot of Hitchcock movies. That's one of the things I sort of been wanting to do, but since I only consider like maybe 3 of them horror, or actually maybe 4 of them horror, I pretty much seen those and ignored everything else. But fantastic movie. Not my favorite Hitchcock movie. I actually enjoyed The Boards more than Psycho, which if you had asked me like 3 weeks ago, I would have thought was impossible, but it's true. So sorry, guys. But it's still a pretty good movie. And I would give this an 8.5. And I think I had to consider this. I think I would round it down to an 8 out of 10.
Yeah. So my rating for this one is a 7, and I even considered maybe even going up to an 8. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. Now, I know some people are going to see that 7 and go, what the fuck is wrong with you? And let me just say that for a movie from before the 70s to get a 7 from me, much like the inflation with the 40k being 350k, that almost translates to about a 9 or a 10 out of 10 type movie. Because I literally cannot think of a single movie from the 60s that I would ever rate a 7 or an 8 out of 10 outside of Psycho that I've seen so far.
It's just amazing.
So, you know, it's just the movies from the 60s and before that, yeah, they just don't do it for me.
On a exciting side note, nice comparison, just earlier today I watched a movie from 1928, so... different strokes for different folks.
To me, it's like, I don't know if this is the best analogy, but it's just one that pops up in my head. It's kind of like, you know, when people started using PCs and they got Windows 95. Oh my god, this is fucking amazing. And for the time, it's fucking amazing. But now, you know, compare that to having a PC now, with whatever, Windows XP, Windows 10, whatever. The first time you use it, probably not as exciting because, you know, we've had PCs and we know they get slightly better and better and better over time. And, you know, I kind of feel that same way with how people react to movies. Like, I can understand why people would say Psycho is a classic. You know, they give it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. And, you know, when you first use Windows 95, you're like, oh my god, this is fucking amazing. But I don't compare movies or review movies that way. Like, I'm reviewing Windows 95 as if I'm using it right now. So, which, you know, ain't as great as what we got now. And that's not to say new movies from 2010 are better than movies from 1980. That's not what I'm saying, but I think there's certain limitations that movies back in the 60s had that movies, you know, once we got color and certain effects and things like that, which certainly made it a lot easier to enjoy movies from, you know, the 70s, 80s, and so forth. So anyways, like I said, probably not a great analogy, but it's one that kind of popped up in my head.
I was just going to say how to disagree and just move on with life.
The last movie for today is The First Power from 1990, which is about a LA police detective and a female psychic who are out to stop a demonic serial killer who was given powers of resurrection, teleportation, and possession. Now, I've seen people talk about this movie in various, like, Blu-ray groups, because some people, you know, show that they bought this movie here and there, and people comment on it saying, you know, it's a pretty good movie. You know, I had a bit of an up and down time with it. Overall, fairly entertaining. I like the idea of it. It seems to be very similar to a movie like Shocker, I guess, which is a movie I haven't watched in a while, but from what I recall, there was a lot of body hopping and that type of stuff, and that's what happens in this movie.
Yeah, I'm going to say Shocker has its problems, but I definitely thought Shocker was better than this one.
Yeah, I would probably say the same, just based on what I can remember from Shocker, even though I don't think it's a drastic leap. They're both, for the most part, at least to me, fairly similar in terms of enjoyment. Maybe Shocker's a little better. I mean, I enjoy the movie La Bamba, which is a movie that Lou Diamond Phillips Head Screwdriver is in, and I mean, that's not a horror movie or anything. That's
I was just thinking La Bamba. Fuck is that?
But I think that might have even been one of his first movies, or at least it's got to have been his first leading role. But that's a really good movie, but not a horror in the slightest. But yeah, I enjoyed Lou Diamond Phillips Head Screwdriver in this. But you know, it's a pretty generic cop role type movie. Like, there's nothing really about his character that's all that different from a lot of other, you know, these types of movies where you got a detective chasing a serial killer. There's nothing special about the characters, I guess. Though he does have a lovely cat, I must say.
Yeah, so this is a movie that I I'm assuming I heard about it at some point. It never sounded particularly interesting to me. You know, it was an okay movie. The thing that struck me pretty early on is it to me it feels like a TV movie. I know it apparently came out in theaters because I actually spoke to some guy who actually took his girlfriend to see this back when it came out. So that's sort of interesting, but it's I don't know. It doesn't seem like there's a whole lot going as far as effects or budget's concerned. Not that there weren't some good scenes. To be honest, I think the best scene is probably with that horse trampling that guy to death. That was some quality stuff. I enjoyed that. But for the most part, I just felt sort of blah about the whole thing. I mean, it was okay, but it just felt generic. And then once the priest joined in toward the not priest, the nun joined in at the end, I'm like, I really don't care anymore. And I honestly, once the whole ending happened, the one chick got kidnapped, I was, I don't know, I sort of, I wouldn't say tuned out, but I didn't care as much. Not that the ending was like the worst part of the movie, it just, by that point in time, my interest had waned to the point where even if they had an amazing ending, I don't know if it would made much of an impact on my rating.
Well, I felt like, the movie opened pretty well. I think after the opening, there's maybe a half-hour period where the movie just, like I said, is a bit blah. But I think once the killer establishes himself as, coming back in different bodies and whatever, once that kind of action picked up, I was starting to get back into the movie.
Yeah, I didn't mind that. I guess my issue was I feel like a killer like this, and obviously I have no expertise in serial killers, or Satanists, but I feel like a Satanist-based serial killer would it be like a hammy actor, and he just like I wish he had like a more serious disposition. Like if it's, I mean I know he's out for revenge, but he was never like overtly comedy. But I don't know. I wish his attitude had been a bit more serious minded. It's not like a big thing because I actually think the actors overall pretty okay. I just wish the character had been a bit differently portrayed.
I think when the movie started to pick up was this one scene where the killer attacks Lou Diamond Phillips' head screwdriver in a apartment complex or something, or like he smashes through a door, and there's this one moment where the killer pulls a fan from the ceiling and then starts using it like some oversized weed whacker. That was
Yes.
great. That was a really good scene, I thought. And then I think there was maybe like a car stunt after that. And the car stunt was pretty funny, especially when you see the killer fall off the car because it clearly looked like a dummy. But I enjoyed that nonetheless. Once we got to a point where the killer was just constantly attacking them left, right, and center through different bodies. Not that I enjoyed every single body that he was possessing, but that was good because you never quite knew when an attack was coming at you. In another area, the character of Tess the Redhead, played by Tracy Griffith, she was pretty cute. I had to mention that I was, as I do with a lot of redheads in movies, I always have the question burning in my mind.
Oh boy.
Does the carpet match the drapes?
I'm just happy that's your very first thought when this redhead actress comes on screen.
I'm only one man. And what a man. No, wait, yeah.
I think she was actually a mildly decent character. There was a scene in which I think the two of them were in a bar and she just started drinking. Like, oh, I can drink with her. But I don't know. I did like how they were slowly getting more of a connection because they had slightly different personalities at the beginning of the movie. So that was sort of nice. I just wish the story of it had been more of my cup of tea than it turned out it was. When they were going through like the theological, like the third, second, and first power, I'd never heard of that before. I'm not sure if that's. I'm guessing it's a real thing. Otherwise, that's a really bad name for a movie. But I'd never heard of like the David Powers. So that was, theologically, that was mildly interesting.
Towards the end, there's like this water scene where they're kind of like going down the. I don't know if they're kind of in a sewer going down this slide type thing. That looked really fun. I see, like, I could just see, like, Lou Diamond Phillips. He's the water's coming down and he's struggling to grab onto things. And this is before you go down the sliding part. But I can just see in his mind as he sees the other two go down. I can just see in his mind he's thinking, "Ooh, super fun, happy slide!" And he just really wants to get down there. I would have loved to go down that. It seems to be such like they're playing it out like it's this intense, scary moment where these people are just engulfed by all this water. But I'm thinking, damn, like that's every kid's dream to be going down a slide like that.
Yes.
Even at the age of 36, I can still dream.
Do they not have water parks over in Australia?
They do, but I just couldn't be fucked going to one.
Okay.
I think the last one I went to was maybe 5-6 years ago.
So, theoretically, what would you rate this movie?
Jeez, I'm struggling between a 6 and a 7. And I feel like if I watch it again, that'll help solidify my rating, and I will watch it again, I'm sure, in the next few years. So it was just a little too inconsistent with that half-hour period where I felt like it's just too generic. I enjoyed the constant attacking, but I didn't quite... Like, body hopping's one of those things that I've never found to be... I don't know, it just didn't do it for me. I'll give it a 6 out of 10 for now, but I can see myself potentially giving this a 7 with another rewatch. Yeah, just to see if that helps solidify my thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I thought this movie started out decently strong. The initial chase scene when he has the female cop is, I think, pretty good. And I even like the just them celebrating when the guy gets a death penalty. Even after the guy promised the guy, "Oh, I will go for the death penalty." I think it's fun. It's realistic. But then once the forced power kicks in, I don't know, it's not really my cup of tea. I was briefly reminded of a much better movie with my homeboy Jeff Goldblum in it from Hideaway from 1995. That's a good movie.
I would say if Tracy Griffith had gotten a titty out or something, then I probably would have given this a 7.
See, and I guess that goes partially to my reiteration. To me, something about this movie just felt like a TV movie. Which is fine. I don't have anything against TV movies, but TV movies from the 90s is not like it's not the pinnacle greatest time for television horror. The thing about all the Stephen King adaptations that came out in the 90s, which weren't necessarily great. So, this movie is okay. I didn't hate it, but I definitely found my interest waning toward the end, so I gave this one a 5.5, and I think because I enjoyed some of the scenes, I did like the horse trampling like I do death, good times. I'm giving this rounding up to a 6 out of 10.
Yeah. Well, I never quite got the TV vibe from it, but I did get more of a straight-to-video type vibe from it. And I feel there's a bit of a difference between TV movie and straight-to-video movie, but yeah. Like we said earlier, if you enjoyed Shocker, it's worth checking this out, and Shocker's probably a little bit better, and speaking of Shocker, I'd give Tracy Griffith a shocker.
Yes. Yes.